And good, we're ready to get started. Week 2, Session 2 of Melanin, the God or the Divine Particle. And just want to real quick welcome everyone that's able to join us for tonight's session. We're going to do a quick review of what we went over last week. And we said that last week was that we were laying one of the major fundamental building blocks for the class. Got some more people joining us. Okay, good. And we told the story of Yakub, or Jacob, and the creation of what we're going to refer to and what the ancients referred to as the aberrant man, the aberrant man. And we said that that was a genetic modification and creation of a subspecies that we refer to as the European or the white race. This comes as a shock and a surprise to most people that have not been familiarized with this story, but it is in all the ancient writings. It is the best kept secret and the worst kept secret, one of the worst kept secrets in existence. The evidence that it's the worst kept secret is the development of kind of a cover story called the theory of evolution that was championed by Charles Darwin. And it postulated the true history, not of man, not of human beings, but of what is called mankind. Mankind. The indigenous peoples, and this is a scientific fact, scientific proof of this, that indigenous peoples, by and large, are the original human beings, the only one that can be classified as a human being. The European is humankind. You'll hear that used interchangeably with the term mankind. A kind of man, a kind of human. And the proof is in the fact that the European, and again, they display it in their science. That the European is a hybrid subspecies. A hybrid subspecies. And they admit it. But they want to lump us in with their origins as a sort of cover-up, because it was our ancestors, our ancient ancestors, that performed the genetic marvel of creating what we know as the white race today. Now, the reasons behind that, once we lay the foundations, we will get into it. But we're going to build this thing brick by brick, starting with the foundation. And we're going to understand that melanin and the science of melanin, the science of genetics, undergirds and underscores every aspect of history on this planet, especially recently. So the first foundation, you have to understand that all men are not created, number one, and all men are not equal, number two. All men are not created. Indigenous peoples did not get here by a process of creation, divine or otherwise. We emanated into these earth realms. We were beamed down, so to speak. Again, we're going to have the science and that whole process later. But we must understand how history records, ancient history records, the formulation of a particular race of people that we refer to as aberrant mankind or aberrant humankind. So we told the story last week. We're going to begin this week where we left off. So we talked about and gave evidence from ancient texts last week, how they talk in very clear terms of this scientific genetic experiment that took place. And when we, in the Bible, when we hear, let us make man in our image after our likeness, automatically we should know that that is not talking about our origins in no Garden of Eden. It is talking about the us in that equation was our ancestors that made an aberrant subspecies. All right? We won't go back into the details of that. We covered it in the last session, I think pretty thoroughly. If you need a refresher, go back and look at those notes. Go back, view the videotape that is both on YouTube and on in the group on Facebook. Background noise. Remember, when you get on to mute your phones, and when it's time for you to speak, you can unmute it so we don't get the background interference. All right, so let's get into the details. We also said that melanin is what is recorded as dark matter energy, or dark matter and dark energy, and that it exists outside, both inside and outside, the created realms. both inside and outside of the created realms. And we just refer to it as dark matter, dark energy. It is also referred to as a number of names, almost too many to enumerate, too many to list, um, in different languages and cultures by many different names. And we'll cover some of those, but again, by no means all of them. So when the European looks into his past or looks in his shadow, shadow meaning the hidden and unknown areas, he sees the shape of a monkey, an ape. It is not me saying it. It is them admitting it. It's not. I didn't originate this, and neither did the NOI, the Nation of Islam. Neither did the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, nor Fard Muhammad. This is a scientific fact that is well documented in ancient writings over and over again. The problem is, like I said, it's the best kept secret and it's the worst kept secret. We do not study this, although we study evolution. We do not study the facts behind evolution. Who in their right mind would come up with an evolutionary model that says that your beginning started with an ape? So it has to be some truth to it. That is not a flattering model. And that is not our history. I repeat, that is not the history of melanated indigenous people. Moving forward, the key to all of this is to get us back in contact with our power, because we're going to find that our ancestors and the information that they hold for us, the wisdom, is the key to reconnecting with our power. For the kingdom of God is not in word, but in power. And that is going to be the evidence that when you are connected back with your power, it's not you know, I don't want you to leave here to saying that I heard some great information or that was a great class series. I want at the end of this class that I bring you to the doorsteps of your ancient power, and that we start to manifest and demonstrate that on a personal level. That's what this class is about. So it's not about a lot of words, not about a lot of great information. We have great information here. But if it does not lead you to the demonstration, a reconnection with your power, then everything is in vain. Everything about our power, about our history, true and genuine history, has been vilified. It's been demonized. Our divine power, our genius, has been vilified. It's been turned into Satanism. So we must understand that. But this history records it, and we have to separate our history from theirs. And you're going to see why as we go through this process, this learning process. So the all important question is, do you got power? In 1 Corinthians 2 and 4 to 5, it says, my speech and my preaching was not with enticing words of man's wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and power. This information that I'm sharing with you is the first evidence of the demonstration of that power. Everything that I'm sharing with you was a result of our beloved ancestors putting me back into contact, first of all, with them, and then with this information that would lead us back to that divine power that is within all of us. That your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, but in the power of your own divinity. For the kingdom of God is, again, not in word, but in power. And at the end of this, the goal is that you should be able to demonstrate that power whenever and however you choose. So, let's get into it. Activated melanin, which is called the melanin that we're talking about, the particular type is neuromelanin. That is the melanin that is not outside of you in your skin, but inside of you, covering your brain stem, your spinal cord, your central nervous system. That activated neuromelanin is the only source of genuine divine power in heaven and in earth. I'm going to repeat that. Activated melanin, neuromelanin, is the only source of genuine divine power in heaven and on earth. The word power that we read about in 1 Corinthians 2, 4 to 5, and 1 Corinthians 4 and 20 is the word dunamis. Dunamis. And we get the word dynamic and dynamite from that word dunamis. It means force, but specifically miraculous power. Miraculous power. It also refers to the miracle itself, and it also refers to the worker of the miracle. Not separate. Not separate. So we're not looking for God, some God up in the sky, to grant us the power to perform miracles. We are looking to activate the divine miracle working power that is within all of us. So we're going to start talking about science here and not religion. If you try to connect this to any religion that you've been trained in, it will not fit. It will not fit. So, the power refers to the actual power itself, that miraculous or miracle working power, the miracle itself, and the worker of the miracle. It is evidenced in a mighty, wonderful work. so that we're clear. Because once you have that power, you will know that you have it. It means inherent power. That is, power residing in a thing by virtue of its own nature. You are divine in nature, not created. So the power is yours by right and inheritance, by genetics. But we were temporarily disconnected from that power for a reason. Again, the power for performing miracles, to be able to have power by virtue of one's own ability and resources, and most importantly, state of mind. If you have a religious mindset, you will not connect at all to any of this information. These things that we're talking about, again, a direct transfer from the spiritual realm, and they are spiritually discerned, not intellectually discerned, although they will make sense intellectually. Melanin, neuromelanin, the only substance that connects us to God, divinity, and divine power. Melanin is the chemical key to life and all living things. It is the powerful dark matter consciousness and energy that connects us all to creation. Melanin is important because it's the most primitive and universal pigment in living organisms. Melanin is abundantly present within each and every living organ, which aids the human body. Melanin is a superconductor. It always stays charged when it is exposed to things such as light, sound, and color. Light, sound, and color. A lot of people just reduce it down to sunlight, but there are particular sounds and colors that it functions with and interacts with. Melanin can actually absorb, listen, the full energetic spectrum and recharge itself to a brand new level. So, in understanding and tracing this history, like I said, we have to go to many ancient documents from many cultures, and they have been put under the category of myths. So, we've been trained to perceive the word myth as something that is not true, and that is inaccurate. A myth is a traditional story, especially one concerning the early history of a people. So this is where we're going. So we have to go to what has been categorized, and suspiciously so, as a myth, especially one concerning the early history of a people or explaining some natural or social phenomena. We're going to be doing that as well. And typically involving what? Supernatural or miraculous beings or events. And those supernatural beings, miraculous beings, are our ancestors. And the events is going to be what we cover and what cultures and generations and societies, both ancient and modern, are covering to this day. are talking about to this day. The creation of, again, the aberrant man or mankind or humankind being the one that we're going to concentrate on today. An allegory is the expression by means of symbolic fictional figures and actions of truths or generalizations about human existence. The allegory, the biblical narratives are allegories. They are not actual figures, historic figures. The Bible, as we know, all of the characters are symbolic, fictional figures that are what? That doesn't mean that the stories or the actions are not true. They are performing actions of truth and teaching us about human existence. There is one monolithic myth that is told over and over again in different time periods and throughout different societies and cultures that is referred to as a monomyth. It is an archetypal myth, an archetypal rather myth, a theme that underlies another of superficially different myths. So it's actually just one myth with superficial differences. So when we talk about the genetic creation of this aberrant man, it is told in many different cultures, many different societies over time with just slight superficial differences, but it is the same story being told. And my job is to syncretize these different stories so that we come out with one clear understanding of what went on. To syncretize is to attempt to unite and harmonize what? Those superficially different myths into one story. Syncretism is the amalgamation, meaning the unification, incorporation, consolidation, or attempted amalgamation of different religions, cultures, or schools of thought. And we don't want to try to amalgamate different religions, but different religious myths, different cultural myths, different societal myths. So let's begin. And before we begin, I'm going to take a pause to see if there are any questions so far. And if not, if so, speak up. If not, we're going to move ahead. Melanin is, was, will be the sole supreme subject of enmity and controversy on this planet. Melanin was, is, and will be the subject of enmity and controversy on this planet. So we titled this particular portion From Enmity to Controversy. And we're going to take this subject of genetic manipulation and the creation or the formulation of the mutant Edamic seed and the birth of hybrid humankind. From enmity to controversy, and we're going to look at a specific aspect the bruising or the grasping of the heel. Very important that we get this, and we're going to take our time. The miraculous genetic manipulation of the mutant Edomic seed and the birth of hybrid humankind, the birth of the European. We're going to take it from zero and follow it where it goes. And we'll begin with the Bible. Now remember, we said that the Bible story was an allegory based on fictional characters that were put together in an allegorical narrative that was explaining a higher truth or event. So we're beginning in Hosea, the 12th chapter, if you're taking notes, the 3rd verse. The Lord hath also a controversy. There's our word. With Judah. Remember, melanin is the sole supreme subject of enmity and controversy on this planet. So the Lord hath controversy with Judah and will punish Jacob. Now, when we see Jacob, we understand that that is Yakub. According to his ways, according to his doings, will he recompense him. He took his brother by the heel in the womb, and by his strength he had contention or contended with God. So, the sole supreme subject of enmity and controversy on this planet is melanin. We're getting ready to dive into it. The term Jacob's, referring to Jacob's cream crackers, is a London Cockney rhyming slang for testicles or knackers. So, even in modern day slang, they connect this term, they connect Jacob with something that has to do with generative or reproductive power. The word strength here is the word own, meaning generative power or reproductive ability. In the male, the testicles. And we're going to find out that Jacob or Yakub, the controversy that was created, had to do with genetics, generative power, and or reproductive ability. That is the controversy. Here is the enmity now. Now the serpent was more subtle or wise than any beast of the field that the Lord had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree in the garden. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, thee being the serpent and the woman, between thy seed and her seed, again talking about generative or genetic reproductive power, reproductive ability. Her seed, it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise what? His heel. So we go back, look at Hosea. It is talking about generative power, and it also is talking about this term heel, that Jacob grabbed his brother by the heel in the womb. This is coded language, what we referred to last week as a moad or moadim. They are hidden, prearranged signals that are designed to give us a cheat code, a deeper advantage in our understanding of these things, of these allegories that are the Bible story. Again, not talking about actual historic human beings like that, but referring to using fictional characters to tell a story of a higher truth. So if anybody is familiar with childbirth, you can't imagine one child. It's cartoonish to think one child came out of that room, out of that womb in that process, holding on to his brother's heel. That's not how childbirth works, generally. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise its heel. Let's understand what this heel is. It literally means to supplant. To supplant, meaning to take the place of something. Our first understanding. The name Yakub or Jacob, Yakub, means literally supplanter. But we understand that the supplanting that took place had to do with taking his brother by the heel in the womb and dealing with something that had to do with generative power and ability. Let's get into our ancient science. When you look at this reflexology chart, it corresponds to the foot, and the structure of the foot corresponds to the spinal cord and central nervous system, and those processes that are those bodily processes that are governed by each of those positions in the central nervous system and along the spine. You'll see that the heel bone corresponds to birth and pre-birth, grabbing the heel in the womb. And it corresponds bodily or somatically to the coccyx and sacral areas, pelvic area, genital area of the human body, the heel corresponding to the genitals. So we know that this is not talking about some little baby grabbing another little baby's heel. The universal principles are a set of primary elements regulating us and the universe, the cosmos, which we can recognize at the level of awareness at which we are operating. In a way, these laws are an expression of our level of awareness. It is possible to presume that at other levels, different laws are operating. By knowing the nature of these laws, we can benefit from them by aligning ourselves to their dynamism, their miraculous and divine power. At this moment, I'll skip that. I'll read it. At this moment, we are working with 9 universal principles. They are reflected in the feet or the heels, the hands, and the head, and correspond to specific weeks of the prenatal period. He grabbed his brother by the heel in the womb. Coded language, a moad that is not to be understood literally. So again, the heel bone, in terms of these universal principles of polarity, rhythm, correspondence, causation, and gender, the heel bone corresponds to gender. And the heel and also the sacral, or the end of the spine, the pelvic region, also the location of the genitalia, and again referring to generative, regenerative powers and gender, genes. All right, moving forward, looking at the heel in terms of its correspondence in reflexology, you can see that the heel portion corresponds to the ovaries and the testes. The ovaries and the testes. Again, ovary and the testicles in the foot area, right in the center. So again, not talking about some little baby grabbing some other little baby's foot in the womb. That's just allegorical. Again, energetically, the heel area referring to these light energy vortexes, these energy plexuses in our bodies called the chakras, the 7 major ones, the base chakra corresponding to the base of the heel, the sacral chakra referring to the forward tip of the heel bone. So again, placing this in the pelvic area, or in the area, the reproductive areas, with these energy centers that correspond. Everything is connected. We live in an energetic universe. So the Bible story was not talking about some simple cartoonish idea of a baby grabbing onto another baby's heel. This is talking about high science, and we're getting ready to understand it. Things that were supposed to be, were considered in our way of thinking, miraculous 7,000 years ago, that our forefathers had this knowledge. The foot, the heel, is symbolic of generative, regenerative power and genetics. We're getting ready to talk about the genetic manipulation that took place in the formulation or creation of an aberrant subspecies called European man, or called the white race. So genetic modification is the process of changing the structure of genes of a living thing in order to make it healthier, stronger, or in this case, more useful to humans. We are the only humans on this planet. And that genetic modification was not something that was an afterthought or a ambitious science. It was done to create a benefit that would be far-reaching and beneficial in the long run, after it's all said and done, to humans, to the original indigenous people that have always occupied this planet. Genetic hybrid refers to the offspring of parents that differ in genetically determined traits. The parents may be of different species, genera, or rarely families. The term hybrid, therefore, has a wider application than the terms mongrel or a crossbreed. Interesting. That's what they called us, was mongrels, which usually refer to animals or plants resulting from a cross between two races, breeds, strains, and varieties of the same species. There are many species hybrids in nature, and although naturally occurring hybrids between two genera have been noted, most of the latter result from human intervention. If you know a little about genetics, you know that some humans do occasionally wind up with an extra copy of chromosome 21. The result is a person with Down syndrome. Other extra chromosomes can include miscarriages in humans. In mules, with this extra chromosome poses a problem when it comes in creating sex cells. So the evidence of a hybrid is that they have difficulty in breeding. The result we can see in society with all of these fertilization products and techniques, Viagra, Cialis, all of these things that are related to generative power or the lack thereof. The Genesis beginning of the enmity and controversy. We're in Genesis 25, verses 21 and 26. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out, red all over, like a hairy garment. And they called his name Esau. That was the older. And after that came his brother out, and he took hold, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel. Again, we know that this is allegorical. This is not talking about a birth like that of two of the biblical patriarchs, like we've been taught. This is an allegory explaining, as we'll see, a very intense, miraculous scientific technique that took place over 6,000 years ago. And his name was called Jacob or Yakub. And Isaac, their father, was 60 years old when she bare them. All highly coded language, extremely coded language. And we're going to decode it as we juxtapose science to this picture, to this allegorical picture. So what we see on the left are a set of twins, from the same genetic father and mother, but what we see is an expression of two aspects of a genetic reality. On the right, we see dominant characteristics and traits that are expressed in the melanated outer layer of skin in the one child. In the other child, you are seeing a result of recessive traits in light skin, non-melanated skin, pink or reddish color, and reddish hair. Those are recessive genetic traits. This is a problem. This is a flaw that our ancestors determined had to be addressed. And again, do not think of it in terms of color consciousness or race, the subject of race. We have a politicized version or politicized perspective of this that is a result of something that has happened very recently. So we cannot transfer our hang up about race on and color onto our ancestors. They were looking at this thing primarily from a scientific standpoint and exclusively. So we see what was described in Genesis 25 in the verse above, that the one came out red all over like a hairy garment. Didn't say he was hairy like a garment, but red all over like a hairy garment. And we see those things that are called recessive traits. So then Jacob and Esau are symbolic or representative of two distinct genetic types, not two biological historical brothers. Our brilliant ancestors they were teaching us, giving us a lesson about genetics and about a flaw that was discovered. The miraculous power of ancient Sumer. Scholars and historians have been totally confounded by the abrupt rise of the Sumerian culture nearly 6,000 years ago. Now, you remember that it said Isaac was 60 years old, 60, and that Yakub existed about 6,000, 7,000 years ago. You got to keep that in mind, because all this is going to tie together scientifically, historically, culturally, any way that you can fit it together, it is going to fit like a glove. Again, this does not have anything to do with race politics or our current recent obsession with race in America. America wasn't even thought about 6,000 years ago. Understand that. In the Fertile Crescent of the Tigris and Euphrates River, this sudden civilization seemed to appear out of thin air and refuse to conform to the popular historical theory of linear development in cultural evolution. Our ancient ancestors didn't care a thing about that. They demonstrated power whenever they wanted to and however they deemed necessary. Historian Professor Charles Hapgood squarely faces the issue when he writes that today we find primitive cultures coexisting with advanced modern society on all continents. So we shouldn't be surprised that 6,000 years ago there were places that were ultra modern and advanced like they are today, and places that are just dirt poor and what we would call primitive. They coexist now, they coexisted then. We shall now assume that 20,000 years ago, while the Paleolithic peoples held out in Europe, more advanced cultures existed elsewhere in the earth. So they know, it wasn't a thing at that particular time called a white man or a European until what we're about to describe occurred. The Sumerians had the world's finest medicine and pharmacopoeia, the world's first brain surgery, This is a fact. These are our ancestors. The world's first agriculture and farmer's almanac, the world's first cosmology and astronomy, the world's first law codes. And they utilized a highly advanced technology capable of sophisticated metallurgy, smelting, refining, and alloying, as well as petroleum fuel refining. Most importantly, the Sumerians were responsible for the world's first genetic engineering. I'll repeat that again. Most importantly, the Sumerians were responsible for the world's first genetic engineering. And you see here in this stela them performing these genetic alterations. And you see test tubes. You see this tool. It's an umbilical cord cutting tool, the tool in the middle. And you see it around the arm. That turned into the representation of the Ankh, And you see a character called Enki to the right, and his assistant Ninhursag to the left, performing these genetic alterations that we're going to talk about. The features of these individuals that are represented as Sumerians, once you study this history, their features are deliberately distorted. And it goes along with the biblical account that you will not make an image of the gods. All Sumerian texts assert that the gods created man. So we're not talking about man, we're talking about mankind. We'll make that correction right now. We're talking about mankind, not man, not humans. If you are a human, you were not created. You emanated into this reality by choice. Hard thing for us to wrap our minds around, I know, but I'm telling you the truth. Putting the explanation in words uttered by Marduk Enki, the creation epic, reports the decision. Enki is Yakub, none other than Yakub or Jacob, another name. I will produce a lowly primitive. I'm quoting directly from the Sumerian text. I will produce a lowly primitive man, that's inserted. The word is Adamu. Adamu shall be his name. I will create a primitive worker. He will be charged with the service of the gods, that they might have their ease. That is a direct correlation to Genesis 1:26. Let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness. And that is exactly what took place, as we'll see. The very terms, listen, by which the Sumerians and Akkadians called man, quote unquote, bespoke his status and purpose. They referred to him as a Lulu, primitive, Alulu Amalu, primitive worker, and Awilum, a laborer. That man was created to be a servant to the gods did not strike the ancient peoples as peculiar. Sounds peculiar to us because we never were told the true story. That man was created to be a servant of the gods did not strike the ancient peoples as a peculiar idea at all. In biblical times, the deity or our ancestors were referred to as Lord, Sovereign, King, Ruler, Master. The term that was commonly translated as worship was, in fact, in the Bible, avad, to work, toil, labor, serve as a slave. That was not intended to be put on our resume. We were never intended to be servants or slaves like that of a god. We were the god or the deity that was instructing them in their work, in their toil, in their labor, in their service. Ancient and biblical man did not worship his God. He worked for him. He worked for him. This is going to all make sense as we follow the narrative. Quoting again from the ancient Sumerian Akkadian manuscripts. This is Yakub talking, or Enki, or Jacob, the scientist, the geneticist. O my mother, the creature whose name thou hast uttered, it exists. They're talking about this creature here, a bipedal ape. We're getting ready to connect this to the Darwinian evolution story. Bind upon it the will or the image of the gods. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Bind upon it the will or the image of the gods. Mix the heart of clay that is over the abyss. The good and princely fashioners, those are his assistants, that were referred to in the ancient documents as the good and princely fashioners, will thicken the clay. Do thou bring the limbs into existence. Ninmah, the mother earth goddess, Ninhursag, his wife in concert, will work above thee. In other words, they will supervise. Nintu, the goddess of birth, will stand by thy fashioning. In other words, that's another assistant that they refer to as Nintu. O my mother, decree thou it's the newborn's fate. In other words, uh, make up a genetic blueprint that we might follow. These individuals were highly skilled geneticists that could fashion life. Listen, 90% of the European Caucasoid race, as indicated in any physiology medical book you pick up, is in fact Rh factor positive, possessing the identical agglutinogen antibody, anti-Rh central. Excuse me. I talk too much. They are Rh factor positive, possessing the identical agglutinogen antibody called anti-Rh serum as the rhesus monkey. Pick up any medical book, it'll tell you that. It is that genetic similarity that explains the true genealogy of the white race. Not racism, not even racial, just scientific. And again, they admit it. A black man did not come up with the theory of evolution from a monkey. They did, because they know that this is their actual history. But what they're not going to do is give our forefathers the credit of doing the actual operation. That's what they're not going to do. So it's up to me to do it. How about that? Just like the rhesus monkey, who is not the byproduct of mixed breeding, but rather the environmental result of the evolutionary monkey trail that began geographically in Central Africa, the Garden of Eden. The white European is also the environmental byproduct of the evolution human family that is rooted in Central Equatorial Africa. It is a medical fact. Let me highlight that. When the Rh positive agglutinogen is injected through blood transfusion, semen, sex into an Rh negative African person, anti-Rh agglutinogens, that is, seed enmity, automatically developed in the bloodstream of the African, which in turn creates a disruptive cellular reaction that ultimately leads to red blood cell hemolysis or blood protein breakdown. In other words, cellular death. This is from an article, and you can go to it, the Europeans Rh, rhesus monkey, fact or secret. I told you that this is the best and worst kept secret ever. So what we saw here in the flaw or the inability to produce melanin in a recessive strain, expressing itself in a recessive, uh, with obviously recessive trait that we saw or that was recorded in Genesis 25 with Esau coming out demonstrating physically this flaw is called a cutaneous albinism. A cutaneous albinism. And is a group of conditions that affect coloring, pigmentation in the skin, hair, and eyes. Affected individuals typically having very fair skin or white or light colored hair. Researchers have identified multiple types of a cutaneous albinism, which are distinguished by their specific skin, hair, and eye color, by specific skin, hair, and eye color changes, and by their genetic white color and hair. No, I'm sorry, by their genetic white color and hair may be light yellow, blonde, or light brown. Did I say that right? No. And eye color changes by their genetic cause. I'm sorry. All cutaneous albinism type 1 there are 3 types. All right. We won't go through each of them except type 3, because this is what we're seeing displayed here. Type 3 includes a form of albinism called rufous cutaneous albinism, ROA, rufous cutaneous albinism. So when you hear ROA, that is what it's talking about, which usually affects dark-skinned people. Affected individuals have reddish brown skin, ginger or red hair, and hazel or brown irises. Type 3 is often associated with milder vision abnormalities than the other forms of cutaneous albinism. So when it says that the child came out red like a hairy garment, it was talking about a scientific flaw in darker skinned indigenous people called a cutaneous albinism. So, in the story of Jacob, again, in allegorical form, it talks about his keeping of the flock of Laban, which again is just another story or allegory talking about genetics and specifically color genetics in animals. Color genetics in animals. So again, it is giving us a primer to understand the basics of genetics and why it is so important in this physical realm. Again, this thing has been politicized, it has been socialized, and we have understood the political and social implications of color, as well as cultural implications of it, but we've never talked about the science. We've never been taught about the science. But our ancestors made certain that it was in the most accessible book on the planet, and that is that Bible. We never looked below the surface until now. So we're going to pause here. We're at the top of the hour almost and allow for questions. We're going to take about a 5-minute break. If you have questions, just turn your mic on, ask the questions, and we'll answer. Comments as well.
Hello.
Hello, go ahead with your question.
Um, yeah, just to get that off over there because it's too much feedback. Okay, my speaker on my computer is kaput, so I'm watching you on the speaker, but I also have a cell phone. Um, so there is a reason why when they did the human yeah, take it off the speaker, genome project, that they used Africans because of the purity of the blood, the purity of the species, because it would be tainted if they did anything other than that.
That's correct.
And it is something, I mean, you'd have to even dig just to find that out because it's not, they talk about the Human Genome Project, and it wasn't until I talked to a friend of mine who worked on that project. She's a German woman, and she's the one that I think she's the one that told me, or either I did some research close to the time that she told me that. But then, it just made perfect sense when I found that out.
Correct. Yeah, we'll be talking about that Human Genome Project as well, and the creation of these ancestry.coms and all that kind of stuff. That's another distraction. But we'll save that for a little later on. But you're absolutely correct in that observation.
Thank you.
All right.
Hi, hey, and everybody. This is Enray. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
How you doing?
Yeah. Are you going to? Okay. How are you?
Doing well. Go ahead.
Great. Are you going to go in depth about how the various animals, all these animal kingdoms that have the same recessive gene, how that took place?
No, we're gonna
Have you?
we're gonna stick to because the big problem, and again the source of enmity and controversy, the source has to do
Mhm.
with this showing up in the populations of dark skinned or melanated peoples. So
Yeah.
we're going to follow that line very closely because it has implications to
Right.
everything that we have experienced, especially within the last 6,000 years.
Right. Okay.
Um,
Yeah, because I was just thinking about the period of time when all the geneticists were doing these experiments, because these experiments, for them to get the upright humankind, took thousands of years, from
Yeah,
what I understand.
yeah,
And
those were our ancestors that did that, and they did it
right,
for a
it,
very
it, it,
specific
and
purpose.
yeah, and in the meanwhile, they had many flaws, and they thought that the other beast that they weren't able to take instruction, so they had to also perfect the ability of the human brain to take orders. Um, and so all these different beasts that we see on the planet, um, can be, and this is just my thinking from what I read about Enki and Enlil, because I looked into that story pretty in depth starting years ago. We have all these beasts, and I'm thinking that some of these beasts that are cast into the forest, and they couldn't do anything with them because, according to that story told by the great grandson um, of a Native American tribe, the ones that had contact with an alien on the Area 41. I mean 54. What is it? Area 51.
Yeah,
You heard about that story?
had no contact with no alien. We got to stop that.
You okay?
All of this information is directly from the writings and recordings of our ancient ancestors. This alien, all this kind of stuff, again, a distraction. A distraction.
Yeah. Well, but this is a man. I can't remember his name. Is Robert Black Sky or Blue Sky, something like that. But he's saying that his when his great grandfather was doing a rites of passage with a few other people in the tribe, that they saw the crash landing, and they actually had the same thing that we're talking about here, but not in depth, about the beginnings, with the human experiment.
Correct.
But my point is that there were a lot of beasts that were cast out into the wilderness because they were defective. They weren't able to take instruction.
Correct.
So I was just,
right. And
feeling that a lot of the beasts that we see, cows and donkeys, and they all have this RH negative thing going on, that those were part of the experiment that were failed experiments.
Okay.
That's what I was leading to.
All right. Okay. Anyone else?
Shalom.
Hey, shalom, Malak.
Shalom, my brother. My question is, are we saying that the reason why the Caucasian has treated us the way he has treated us because we were the original slave masters?
No, that's part of it. That's part of it. It's too simplistic. We yeah, we have to understand that the vast majority of them do not know any of this science. It is only that less than 1% that we're always hearing about that actually know, what this is and are really the puppet masters in this current matrix. But once we know that that what melanin does is creates a more civilized or human individual. The more melanin you have, the more human you are. The less, just like it shows up in skin color, hair color, eye color, it shows up in energetic character as well, what we would call spiritual character as well. So when you are lacking that, you don't need much motivation to do inhuman things. It becomes inherent by virtue of your relationship with melanin, dark energy, dark matter. You with me?
Okay.
So we have a tendency to look at this thing from a political and societal aspect. We want to keep to the science because this is not personal. What you said, it factors in there, but we have to understand that the masses of those individuals that have mistreated melanated indigenous people historically, they don't have access to this information. They do not
Okay.
know any of this. So we're talking about, again, something that is lacking in humanity, and it is chemical, it is genetic, and we have to understand that primary and fundamentally. Then we'll understand why we had to go through. Eventually, this is going to lay the groundwork why we voluntarily went through this process of correction. It didn't have anything to do with obeying any laws or anything like that. This is an alchemical process. that we are going through to eliminate a flaw. And it looks like human history, but it is actually an experiment, a major, not an experiment, because you don't know the outcome. Our ancestors knew the outcome, predicted the outcome. It was a scientific process, an alchemical process that we are currently undergoing. All right?
Hold on.
All right.
I have a quick, I have a very quick question. Oh,
Okay.
I'm sorry. Um, in Africa, where they have like groups of where when an albino is born, they're they have to be protected. And in Africa, and I don't know what part of Africa, because I was trying to remember what area it was in Africa. Maybe you can help me. Where if a woman has an albino child, they try to move to a certain area where there are other albinos,
Yes.
because if not, they will be killed. Yes.
Right.
So you know about that.
And it, again, that those individuals, now we might think of that as severe, but it just underscores the supreme importance that of us discovering this flaw. See, we tend to have a view of these things, again, that are societal, that are religious, that are that are political, and we're missing the point. We're missing the point. We do not understand the importance of melanin. It is not just a skin color. We're talking about neuromelanin that affects the overall um, energetic well-being and balance of this planet. We're going to see that. So yeah, in certain African societies, the individuals were ostracized. But again, that was for the overall good. We have to understand the importance of this, of melanin now. It is the source of all controversy and enmity on this planet. And it does not have to do with race politics. It has to do with the actual quality of life itself on this planet. So when we get into talking about the reasons for creating this aberrant species, and very quickly, it was to isolate this particular recessive quality within a population, and then for the purpose of eradicating it over a period of time. So once we understand this, we're going to understand that's going to underscore the power, the indescribable power, immeasurable power of this thing that we call dark energy matter or melanin. All right? Let's move on then into the second half of this. So we're going to have to understand again that the part of Genesis 25 and Genesis 1, and again Hosea 12 and 3, they were talking about the specific qualities of human genetics, dominant and recessive characteristic in humans. All right? But there was another player in this equation, and it was something that was a step lower, a a chromosome lower than a human, a hominid, a bipedal hominid, an ape, something that was not that was an animal. So Jacob and Esau, that allegory explained human genetics and it showed the flaw. You all with me? So the story, the allegory about Jacob keeping Laban's flock is a story that is laying the foundation or laying the fundamentals of animal color genetics, specifically goats. Are you all with me? So let's take a look at it, and we're going to begin talking about melanin. Melanin is deposited in pigment granules responsible for color. Now, in animals, it shows up in their fur, all right, the color of their fur or their coat. These come in two basic types, and we share these two basic types as well: eumelanin and pheomelanin. Eumelanin is usually black, but sometimes brown, and it is the pigment that is responsible for black and brown areas on goats, or rarely dusky blue color, hence the word hue, or more correctly, man. So eumelanin refers to men. It is dark, black, or brown. It is a signal that melanin, a primary signal that melanin is present rather within the organism. Usually the color choices with this pigment are either or. Usually the color choices with this pigment are either or. The goat can either form black or brown, but not both. Pheomelanin pigment is responsible for red, tan, and yellow pigment. And we read about this when we talked about oculocutaneous albinism and its recessive qualities and traits. That sounds easy enough, but pheomelanin is very dark. It can be close to the shade of brown, to the brown of eumelanin pigment. It can mimic. Listen, this is why I'm getting ready to explain that you cannot judge things on the surface, because you might see someone that is black as the ace of spades and have a lack of neuromelanin. Not likely, but it can happen. And this is why genetics are problematic. Pheomelanin usually has a redder cast. So again, Esau or Edom, meaning red. Not talking about some little ancient twin that came out with somebody attached on their heel. It's talking about a genetic type, a recessive genetic type. And different between the two, the difference between the two types is generally fairly obvious. Red pigment can also be pale enough to be creamy, nearly white, and this can cause confusion in some instances. So if you're attempting to eradicate it, you must isolate it in a way. The isolation took place in more primitive societies that had lost connection with the science, where they would ostracize members of the society. They would send them off to be separate. Finally, we get into some real genetics. Here we go. Genetics can be confusing and is not always intuitive. It is important to remember that genes occur in pairs, thus the so-called twins in her womb. Each parent transmits only one of its pair to its offspring. That's why people say, let's go half on a baby. This sounds easy, but it is critical to remember that each goat only has 2 genes at each locus or address. So while a goat has 4 grandparents, it can only have 2 genes at a color locus. Very problematic, especially if something recessive or a flaw is going to occur. You're rolling the dice. From these 4, which means that something got left out. This is the flaw. We know that the sire and the dam each must contribute 1, but grandparents get much iffier. Genes are also said to be dominant and recessive. Here we go. Jacob and Esau. This only describes their interactions with one another in pairs, thus the twins in the womb, and says nothing about their prevalence in a population. This is the concern, that this recessive flaw shows up in a population. Here we go. A dominant gene can be rare. How many of us knew that? And a recessive gene can be common within a particular population. The trick here is that a dominant, when paired with a recessive, masks the recessive. Thus, the lighter skinned individual coming out, Esau, with his brother attached to the heel. Do not let the smooth taste fool you. Don't let the dark skin fool you. Or the light skin, for that matter. It is not that intuitive. So an animal with a dominant trait can have 2 doses of a dominant gene, or 1 dose of a dominant and 1 dose of a recessive. And the differences cannot be told by looking. Very dangerous. A goat with a recessive trait, in contrast, must have 2 doses of a recessive gene. The real importance is that the recessive traits can pop up out of nowhere. I'm going to read that again. Recessive traits can pop up out of nowhere. And we tend to judge these societies that ostracize these individuals that come out with the recessive traits. But the reason they're ostracized is because they're not thinking that the individual is more important than what? The overall population. This is a concern, and this is a concern that we have to appreciate that our ancestors understood, since they can be masked by dominant genes. A dominant trait cannot pop up out of nowhere, since it cannot be masked. A good example of this is in Angus cattle. Every now and again, red calves occur in black herds, as red is recessive to black. That's what we saw. They were showing us with Esau coming out like a red, hairy garment in a black population. You all with me?
Okay.
The opposite situation, black calves in red herds, listen, never occurs. For the red recessive cannot hide the black. So what our ancestors did, they isolated the recessive gene in a subspecies combination of a hybrid, because they knew that all of the recessive characteristics would over time work itself out and work itself back to where it could not reproduce itself. So this is the science behind the allegory. In the stellar relief, and again, we see the recessive red appearing in darker or melanated populations. And now here is the detail of the organization, the isolation of this recessive quality. This is Ningit Zeta and Enki, that is Ea or Yakub or Jacob, face Ninma. She holds Adamu, the hybrid Naburian Homo erectus they made. And she exclaims, "My hands have made it." And there is the little Adamu, the hybrid, the recessive image and likeness isolated in the Homo erectus. And thus, their genetic, not our genetic origins, their genetic origins. From an ape, from a monkey. Not racism, not reverse racism, genetics, genetic history, verifiable. And again, they know this. That less than 1%, they know it. Melanin, another word for melanin, is the word soul, Soul. This is why Carl Jung has a picture of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil with the apple missing, with the apple falling or the fruit falling, the man walking forward, but his shadow turned around looking at that scene from Genesis. He was created by and large without melanin and thus without a soul, or with very little soul. We have to set this foundation again, or everything that we have understood about ourselves and about the predicament that we currently are in, socially, culturally, politically, we won't have a clue as a real clue as to what is actually going on. This has to do with genetics. It has to do with an alchemical process to correct a flaw, a cutaneous albinism. And again, not just as it refers to the politics of skin color. This goes much, much deeper than that. Although we have to talk about it because it's a part of the science. So the stela that shows this scientific process, you see them with the test tubes and the tree again in the background with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 branches on it. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But again, setting this foundation. So recessive gene expression in a dominant population, that was the flaw, isolated in a subspecies, and we come up with the modern day European or aberrant man, aberrant mankind. Ancient Sumerian texts record evidence of genetic manipulation and creation of the hybrid aberrant mankind. Aberrant is defined as wandering from the usual course or differing somewhat from a group in which it is placed. So the European places itself as Homo erectus, all right? But it is not the original or indigenous human that occupied this planet for millions and millions and millions of years. We've visited this planet. We've occupied, we've emanated within these territories. And this European, it's not politically correct to say it, but it is scientifically correct. They differ somewhat from the group in which they were placed. Let us make mankind in our image after our likeness. Aberrant has the connotation of wandering away and going astray, roaming, straying, roving. See the word air, errare, being in error, being flawed. Again, not politically correct, not even trying to be politically correct, not even acknowledging any political any political cachet or any political content to this whatsoever. That is something that is a modern fixation, not our concern. We're just concerned about the science and ancient evidence of this science. From the Sumerian text, as they examined this Homo erectus, I quote you from the ancient text. This is Yakub or Enki or Ea speaking. Akin to ours it is, talking about that we have similar DNA. Like two serpents intertwined, our life essence, our image and our likeness shall be combined with it. See, they don't teach you this in religious institutions. They don't teach you any of this stuff in your belief systems, because it would destroy those belief systems. Those religious systems would implode. So they give you the Bible verses, but never go into the science behind it. The Yazidi text, I allowed the creation of four substances, four times and four corners. They are necessary things for creatures. These are the four elements, the four basic elements. So the double helix, the two intertwined serpents, symbolic of and a symbol of a master geneticist possessing serpent knowledge, which is knowledge of how genes move, how genetic information moves, how it is contained in a serpentine or wave-like pattern. As a matter of fact, all energy moves in a serpentine fashion. The individuals that were the masters, our our ancient ancestors that were masters at this, were called Naga or Anunnaki. They were called Naga or Anunnaki. And they later became known as the wise serpents. The wise serpent people. They were masters of energy in all of its forms and master creators. Here you see Ingizita and Enki Ea on the right, and this is, he's got the two serpents and intertwining them, saying, akin to ours it is, like two serpents entwined. Our life essence shall be combined. This is what the biblical creation story is excerpted from and is used in an allegory to talk about this miraculous genetic process that took place. Ea Enki or Yakub was described as the wise and intelligent one, the prudent one of skills, the fashioner, of the design of everything brought to life, birth goddesses, and the creation of humankind. So he was known, again, in different societies. This process was told, the same myth was told with slight variations, slight uh, differentiation, but it was basically the same thing. And Enki and Ea and Yakub were known by other names and designations. But it's only important, the names are not important. The only important thing is that we know the process that was done. Ancient historical records suggest that they always try in this that is, they, mankind and humankind, were created by genetic engineering. This they know. This they know. Ancient historical records suggest that humankind or mankind was created by genetic engineering. By contrast, ancient historical records suggest that modern humans, and again, not talking about us, were created by intent to serve as facile labor. Now listen to look what they do. For a tall, blonde, near human race called the Anunnaki. That's where they come with this big switch. 6,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, nothing tall and blonde existed, except if that individual had occult cutaneous albinism. So this is why we can't go with the ancient alien uh, take on this story, because it has been politicized. It has been socialized, and it departs from the truth drastically. And I'll prove that. So if they were tall and blonde, all right, explain this to me. The two leaders of the ancient expedition to Earth were called Enlil, Lord of the Sky, and Enki. Enki and his colleague Ninmah decided to create a hybrid between the tall Anunnaki and local Aboriginals. So when they say Aboriginals, what are they talking about? Melanated individuals who were still eating plants and fields or drinking water from ditches. So they would carry out in vitro fertilization, re-implant the fertilized embryos in a dozen Anunnaki women, birth goddesses, and look to see what might be produced. After many trials, Ea Ninmah eventually succeeded in creating a small number of suitable hybrids who would be able to perform hard labor for the Anunnaki at agricultural, mining, or construction. Members of the new hybrid race were called the black-headed ones in the law code of Hammurabi. Likewise, it says in Genesis that the Elohim made us in their own image. So if the image was coming out black-headed, it could not come from anything that was tall and blonde, because we know on earth That is a recessive quality. So we caught them in a lie in their own article. Likewise, it says in Genesis that the Elohim made us in their own image. Now we can understand how modern humans on earth were created suddenly by a quantum jump, and also why the male Y chromosome in humans today does not match well to lower primates. Now we don't understand that. That sounds smart to people that don't know about genetics. So we'll move on. And after Enki, the fashioner, designs by himself, had pondered the matter, he said to his mother, Nama or Ninma, my mother, the creature you plan will really come into existence. Impose upon him the work of carrying baskets. You should knead the clay from the top of the Abzu. The birth goddesses will nip off the clay and shall bring the form into existence. Let Ninma act as your assistant. Let Ninima or Ninima and Kuziana and Ninmada, all the rest of them, and Ninguna stand by as you give birth. My mother, after you have decreed his fate, let Ninma impose upon him the work of carrying baskets. So you see within that the story, if it was uh, in vitro insemination, what do they call it? In vitro fertilization, you get the story of what the miraculous conception, the immaculate conception. You all with me? The immaculate conception. So all of these myths about immaculate conception and all that kind of stuff has to do with high science in ancient times. High science in ancient times. So the recessive gene is actually our genetic Achilles heel. That is the flaw, the bruise, the weakness that is in the heel or the area of regenerative genetic regenerative power. So that bruise is the Achilles heel. And the Greeks came up with another allegory that talks about this flaw and brings it into clearer, sharper focus for us. Achilles was a Greek hero of the Trojan War stories. He was the bravest, swiftest, and handsomest of, or it should be most handsome, of Agamemnon's army before Troy. He was the son of Thetis and Peleus. His name is perhaps a compound of akos, pain and grief, and laos, the people. So that name was talking about this flaw that could eventually become a pain and has become a pain and a source of grief for our people. An Achilles heel is a weakness in spite of overall strength. The overall strength is the dominant characteristic of melanin. The weakness is the tendency within the earth realms for recessive qualities and traits to pop up within the population, reveal themselves, or not reveal themselves, become masked in by dominant by the dominant characteristics. While the mythological origin refers to physical invulnerability, idiomatic references to other attributes or can uh, qualities that can lead to downfall are common. But we're certain that our ancestors saw this, were alarmed by it, and went about their business, made it their business to rather take care of this. And we are part of that process within the last 6,000 years. So we said that melanin is the source, the sole source of enmity and controversy on this planet. So I included this article because this is so funny that now there's this controversy that was created because they have a black actor playing Achilles in an upcoming uh, epic that is appearing on Netflix. Social media users have expressed their anger at the new series produced by the BBC and Netflix, in which Greek mythological figures such as Achilles, Patroclus, and Zeus are being played by black actors. In Troy, Fall of the City, an 8-part series that chronicles the Greek siege of the city of Troy, Achilles is played by interstellar Cloud Atlas, and man in the orange shirt starred David Gayassi, and that is him playing Achilles. And you got to understand that this article came out January 2nd of this year, just as the ancestors was revealing this part of the study in terms of the Achilles heel. As a matter of fact, I think it was only a matter of about 3 or 4 days when I included this in the notes. And I thought that was pretty funny. The same character, Achilles, was played in 2004 film Troy by Brad Pitt. And so they're in this uproar that they're portraying a Greek as a black man, but they don't understand that here is a representation of a Greek man circa 200 BC and a Greek woman 200 BC. So, the ignorance is really amusing to me. Everybody all outraged on social media because they're ignorant to this history. And everybody is caught up in the politics of race and outraged by something that they should not be outraged about if they knew their true history. In Greek mythology, when Achilles was a baby, it was foretold that he would die young, that he had a flaw. To prevent his death, his mother Thetis took Achilles to the river Styx, which is supposed to offer powers of invulnerability, immortality, and dipped his body into the water. However, as Thetis held Achilles by his heel, familiar symbolic gesture, his heel was not washed over by the magical water in the river. Achilles grew up to be a man of war who survived many great battles. One day, a poisonous arrow shot him. Uh, Arrow shot at him and was lodged in his heel, killing him shortly afterwards. So again, this is talking about not a heel like that, but a genetic flaw. The heel corresponding again to the generative, regenerative power, and the fact that the heel was not covered and was vulnerable is indicating symbolically, allegorically, that there is a flaw in our people in the earth realm that has to do with genetic, dominant, the interplay of dominant and recessive characteristics. So, before we go on to the next level, we've taken this thing and ratcheted our level of understanding and the level of the uh, vibrational frequency of the teachings up, away from what? A simple cartoonish understanding, grade school understanding of the story of Jacob and Esau, and moved it into the area of our ancient science and our brilliant understanding of ourselves and how to self correct and self heal. We got to see this. Now we're going to take a step backwards and a step higher into the realms of the energetic nature of melanin, of dark energy, dark matter, and begin to understand our origins from a purely energetic standpoint. Because what we're going to understand that if we're going to access this power, we're going to have an understanding of our energetic nature and the energetic nature of what is called the universe or the multiverse, the energetic nature of life. Look, if you wish to understand the universe, think of energy, frequency, and vibration. So, our next class, we're going to take this thing to the next level to move it beyond the physical flesh and talk about the correspondences of energy with our biology. And again, we're going to be looking at these ancient symbols and how they correspond to these energy centers, these energy vortexes that exist within all of us. So we need to really go over these notes again, familiarize ourselves with this fundamental understanding of humankind and this hybrid. Now we're going to get into the reasons energetically, because again, this we're talking about skin color, we're talking about dominant and recessive traits, but there is a correspondence with energy that we don't know about that has to do with the very quality of life within this physical realm called the earth realm. Then we'll have, when we understand this thing in terms of energy, moving it away from politics, moving it away from societal norms, moving it away from our limited religious or belief system out moving it outside the context of that and understanding this thing in terms of energy. In terms of energy, we will begin to again look at the energetic quality of this particular reality that we inhabited. And again, especially as it relates to the last 6,000 years, we're right at the end of this process, right at the end of this process. And it is time to reconnect and reactivate our power, reconnect with our power, reactivate with our power. And again, this class is going to be step by step instructions about that. And the proof is going to be if we have actually done that. I'll tell you this, I know that it is more than a possibility, it is more than a probability. It is a likelihood that many of us on this call will actually do it if we apply ourselves. All right? So, again, we're going to stop here right before the end of the class and ask if there are any questions, any comments. We covered everything.
Well, you almost covered everything.
No, we covered everything in the notes.
In the notes. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, we covered everything. We covered everything in our notes. So that's what we're going to pick up next week.
Mario, and something like that. Here we go.
Keith,
Yes.
I have a question. I put it off on the side in the chat. I don't know if you could see it.
Oh, okay. Let me take.
But I did that.
Let me open up the chat 1 second. Okay. Is what I just read related to the passage in the Bible that the sons of God went into the sun? You're absolutely correct, and we're gonna go into that and put that within its proper context. But Nahay, you are right, uh, laser sharp focused on the particular area that we're moving into. All right.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Excellent. All right. We're gonna end the recording right here. And again, over the next few days or so, it's going to be available both on YouTube and on the group site, the House of New Black Consciousness on Facebook. And we want to thank everybody for attending. Thank you for your attendance and attention. And we're going to end it right here.